So I just want to show you what the animation is going to look like when I'm done, so you can see the end result. I like having I think this ride-on effect is really helpful to know how to actually do that for any kind of reveals or motion graphics. It's also a really nice way to get used to using track mats, which are really powerful in After Effects and a little bit hard to grasp initially. So I think getting into track mats early is good. Really what this is about is the ride-on effect, and then track mats, and really just knowing how the animation process works in After Effects. And I also want to say, this is just my example of a logo. I want this to be educational, but I don't want you to copy exactly what this logo does. I think using these principles, it's possible to apply them to your own logo or whatever you want to do with it. I want the high point text to write on, so it looks like it's being written on. And we're going to do a series of animated strokes to achieve that. And then I'm going to do just a quick thing where these lines will come out from behind this, and then these words will animate on. So it won't be too complicated, but it's going to be kind of tedious to get the strokes to work right for all of these different lines for the text. And so I want to show you what I mean by that first. First of all, I'm going to do a thing called parenting, where all of these layers are going to be controlled by one layer. And I'm going to do that with a null object. So it'll make sense in a second when I get it all made. But what you can do first is, if you go up to the layer drop down, go to new, there's this thing right here, a null object. And what that is, and you see when it gets added, what that is it's just a point in space. And it has all of the same parameters, which we'll get into, as any other layer. But what is cool about null objects is because they don't have an image or anything attached to them, you can use that as a controlling object for other layers. And so what I'm going to do is, if you highlight the layer in the timeline, hit enter, that's how you can rename things. And so I'm just going to call this parent. And that goes for anything inside After Effects to be renamed. Anything in here you need to hit enter to rename it. So what I'm going to do is just shift select all these layers like that. And then right here in this section called parent and link, you have these a Pic Whip is what it's called. And you can just click that and drag and then point it to a layer like that. So once I did that, all these layers now have this, which means these layers are parented to the first layer with number one layer called parent. Parented to the parent. Now what that does is, now when I move this with the position parameter, I can just scrub these like this. So now everything will move, every one of these layers will move with the null object. And that's really helpful. And all of it too. It'll rotate, it'll scale too. That's going to be really helpful to just keep the whole layer, to keep the whole logo together and all the layers to be moving at the same time. You just parent all of that to a null object. I'm going to move this up a little bit. So that's, first of all, that's really nice. And the thing that you got to see too is, like, when I scale this up a lot like that, you can see how it gets so pixelated, like an image. Now that's not good, and that's the beauty of Illustrator vector files. It just has to be turned on. So it's pixelated right now because it's not considered a vector file yet. There's a setting right here, there's a button for vector layer, it says continuously rasterize. And that's what you want. So you just have to click like that and activate it. And you can just go like that for each layer, or you can just click and drag like that and activate all of them. Now see what happens. Look what happens to the text when I let go. Look at that. It's beautiful. And it can go as large as you want, and it will never get pixelated. That's what makes Illustrator files way better than Photoshop files for any kind of vector, or anything that's not an image should be a vector file, so that you can have control over continuously rasterizing that to whatever size you want. It makes it very high quality. So that's really nice. So I can just resize this like this really easily. The first thing I want to do is, also I want to show you, so I have it set up like this. This is my personal setup. Typically in a standard timeline, you're only going to have the mode and the track mat, like these two will be available, or this one will be available. And the way you can get all of them to be showing up at the same time is if you go right here, like on this bar, and right click, you can see how it says columns. Now these are all the different things that you can have activated for view in the timeline. And I typically, so normally you have this set up like that. Like that's what you normally see. And I just like having all of that stuff available without having to switch modes or anything. So I just like to have parent and link activated as well, so you can see everything laid out in the timeline. And so moving on, we're going to start making a stroke and writing on this H right here. And the first thing I want to do is just make sure that there's no layer selected when you do this, and you go up to the pen tool right here, just like you would in Illustrator or Photoshop, and you can just start drawing a stroke like that. It doesn't need to be exact. You'll see why in a second. So that's basically the first part of the H right there. Now what I'm going to do, and you see up here, it has the fill and the stroke for that. It's called a shape layer. For that shape layer, I'm going to turn off the fill, which you don't do by clicking on the color. You click on the actual fill options right here, and you can just select to have it say none. Now you've got that, and the stroke right here, the weight is only 2 pixels, so you just want to make sure it's big enough to cover up the H. And now you can kind of refine this so it covers up the H entirely. Let's see, like that. There we go. There we go. So now it's covered up. It's not exact, which doesn't have to be. It's going to end up becoming the thing that we animate to reveal that H. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like for this one section. So what the thing you have to do, and this is where track mats come in, I'm going to put this above the H like that. I'm going to hit enter. I'm just going to call this H reveal. Now when you go into the drop down for a shape layer, you have the typical transform that you have for any other layer, like this, anchor point, position, scale. You've also got this other one called contents. And what that allows you to do is you can control the path and stroke and the fill and the actual transforms of that shape object, which are the same as the other transform. This is for the whole layer. This is just for the shape. Just FYI. But there's one thing you can do with a shape layer that's really nice, if you go to this add right here, you click on that arrow, there's a bunch of different options you can add to this shape layer, and it only works for shape layers. But the one you want to add right here is called trim paths. Now when you add that, it goes right here. If you expand it, there's 3 different animatable parameters: start, end, and offset. Now you just want to deal with start and end. So what that means is it starts at 0 and it ends at 100%, which is the length of the stroke. Now what you can do is, if you watch the stroke, and when I decrease the end, this happens. So actually that's 0%, so it's nothing right now. And then as I scrub up to 100%, it follows that stroke. Now that's what you want. That's going to be the way that we actually reveal this text. Now what I'm going to do is just make a simple animation. I'm going to scrub this timeline marker with a playhead just to like about 1 second. And you can see right here, this tells you where you are in the composition timeline. And it tells you the amount of frames and the frame rate, which is nice. So I'm 1 second and 1 frame in on the composition, which at 24 frames per second turns out to be 25 frames, because 24 frames is 1 second plus 1 frame is 25. That's how that works. So as I scrub this, you can see how it changes. So I'm just going to go like to second, just kind of roughly. And I'm going to hit this stopwatch right here. And this is what animation is. I hit that, turns blue, and you see this diamond right here. That's a keyframe. So that is a recording of a parameter at that point in time. And nothing's going to happen until I make another keyframe. So I'm going to go back to the beginning at 0, and I'm going to scrub this down to 0. Now you see there's 2 keyframes. See, the thing about, it's important about animating in After Effects is once you hit the stopwatch and you make this an animatable parameter, and you go along in this timeline, and say you just you nudge this value, it automatically makes another keyframe because you made a change. So just make sure you know that before you start getting really into animations. Once this is engaged as an animatable parameter, any change you make along the playhead gets recorded. So now if I hit spacebar, it'll play back. And there we go. We have a simple animation of the stroke. And now what you want to do is we're going to use a track matte. Now what that is because this layer is above the H, and I turn on a track matte, right now it's set to none. If I click this, you have these 4 different options. You have an alpha matte, you have the opposite of that, and a luma matte, and the opposite of that. Now it's a little bit hard to explain, but I'll show you what it does with the alpha matte. So if I select that, that's going to disappear, because what's happening is it's deriving its visibility from the layer above. And you can see how now there's these 2 icons next to the name on the layer. This is the thing that's being revealed, and this is the thing that's doing the revealing. And if I turn this off, I go back to no track matte, those go away. And the other thing that's important is when I set this layer to be the track matte layer, it automatically disappears too. So watch, when I go back to the H and I set this to be alpha matte, those icons show up and it disappears, because basically it doesn't need to show up, because it's going to be showing up on this layer. So now when I hit play, look what happens. And that is your very simple ride-on effect. Now you can see what's happening here. If I turn this on, you can see how it's being animated, and it's actually a little bit too wide because a part of that H is showing up right there. So what we can do is actually go back with the pen tool and mess with this. So you can see how it is changing the revealing of that H part. So what I'm going to do, just because it's going to be kind of annoying, is I'm just going to add another point right here and move that in, and then kind of just tweak that angle. Okay, that's your first part of the write-on effect. Now what's cool about a shape layer is you can add more than one shape to that layer. That's why it has like this contents drop down, and it's called shape 1. So if I have this shape layer selected and I have the pen tool, I can make another shape layer, and you can see how it says shape 2. So this is the second shape on that shape layer. So I'm just going to have it go across like that. And I'm going to actually reduce the stroke weight on shape 2. So it just gets that line. Actually, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that actually, but then I'm going to use this. I'm going to make the rest of this H on this second shape layer. So I'm going to go like this actually. Go like that. And I'm going to have this drop down like that. So there's two options you can do with this. Because I have trim path set up already and it's animated, you can do a thing right here. There's an option right here. It says trim multiple shapes. So what that says is when it's set to simultaneously, it's going to animate the trim path along both paths that have been made, both shapes. So it'll, when I hit play, you'll see. So it animates them together simultaneously, which is not what I want, but what you can do is change this section to individually. So it'll start with, well, it starts hierarchically. So because shape 2 is above shape 1, it starts shape 2 first, then it goes to shape 1 individually. So all I have to do is I can actually move shape 1 to be above shape 2, and now you'll see how it changes. That's not too bad, really. But what I can also do, if I leave this set to individually, I mean, it can be either one, but I can set another trim path, a second one. So that's pretty good right there. We're going to refine the animations later. But for right now, that's a good setup for that first H. And that's a good way to start that first H. So then I'm going to do the underline right here, which will be pretty easy. So now once there's no layer selected, I can make it, once I have this pen tool selected, I can make another shape layer. So I'll just do that and go like that. And you can see a new shape layer's been selected. So I'm going to hit enter and rename that underline review. And I'm going to take that and put it above line 1, which is that line. So then I'm going to go in here, and because the stroke is already set, it's got the same settings as the first shape layer. So the fill is turned off. Stroke is set to 41 pixels. I can reduce that to be whatever. It doesn't actually need to be that complicated because it's just a straight line. As long as it covers up the underline, we're good. So that's good like that. And the thing that's kind of annoying right now is you can see right here, it's just a line, like it stops flat like that. What I'd like to do is have the end, or the butt they call it, or the line cap. Right now it's set to butt cap, which is just a flat line, and that's in the stroke drop down of the first shape in that shape layer. So I'm going to change the butt cap to round cap and get like that, which is going to be really nice when it animates on, because it'll look kind of like a brush and not just like a flat line. So we have that set up. I'm going to go back to add trim paths right there, and I'm going to keyframe the end value. And look how that works now. That's nice. Yeah, just like that. Okay, cool. And now I'm going to turn this back on, and then I'm just going to select the line 1 layer and then make this track matte again, make an alpha matte. And you can see what it names the layer above it. Like that's how it knows what layer to use. So it has to be the one above the layer you're doing that to. So I do that, it automatically disappears, and when I hit play, it animates on. It's very nice. Now there's a super awesome shortcut called, it's just U, the letter U. And what that does is it just reveals only the animated parameters of the layers. So if there's no layer selected and I hit U, it reveals every animated parameter of every layer. But if I just select one layer and hit U, it just reveals that one layer. So what I'm going to do is control select both those trim path layers and hit U, so that I can see this is where the first animation ends, this is where the second one begins. So I want to move, I can just drag a box over these keyframes and move them to be right around there. Just like that. This could also, I mean, that's the thing, this could happen at the same time, really, if you wanted it to be. Or it could be slower if you just spread out the keyframes, and it would just take longer to write on. Or faster if you just bring them closer together. So that type of finessing is kind of where it gets tedious, but also like really fun, because that's kind of where the real fun of motion design and making things animate on. That's where the fun is just pushing around keyframes. So that part's done. I'm gonna just pause and make this one, and I'll just resume when the stroke has already been drawn and animated, so I can show you what happens next. Okay, so I got this drawn. Now it goes like that. It's a little bit messy, only because you're seeing, you know, like right here, you're seeing parts of the thing not showing up yet. I'm just gonna go in and refine that because I ended up making a second path for the H part. There we go. There we go. Okay, great. I'm just going to do this so you can watch it, but I'll just speed it up so you can see how it works. Okay, that's the basic write-on effect. It's not bad. It gets the point across. It takes too long. I mean, it takes almost 5 seconds to get the whole thing done. So it's gonna have to be sped up. But all of the animation's been done, so we can go in and refine it. But I'm gonna show you a couple of things first about just making. It's called easing in After Effects, where instead of, you know, you immediately start and then immediately stop, like that type of animation, being able to slow the beginning and the ends down so it looks a lot more natural and realistic. A lot of that takes place in this thing called the graph editor, which is right here. So I'm going to show you just an example real quick of what that means, like what the graph editor does and how that helps make animations look a lot more natural. So I'm just going to make a new composition. If you go down here, here's that button. And it's going to ask you what you want, what your default's going to be. So you have your width and your height. Usually this is set to a 16:9 type video composition. You have all of these presets too, but I'm just going to do one right here, HDTV 1080 24 frames per second. So that means it's a 1920 by 1080 video size. The frame rate's 24, and then you can set your duration of the composition. I'm just going to make it 10 seconds long. Hit OK. And you can name it out here too if you want. I'm just going to do. Boom. Okay, so here's a new composition. You can see right here. Transparency grid's turned on. All I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off the transparency grid so it's just black. I'm going to add a new null object right here. And I'm just going to use that to show you what I'm talking about. So here's your null object. And if you right here in the layer, in the timeline, you can expand this to go into the transform parameters. And these come with every new layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrub this is the X position and the Y position, the coordinates of that null object in the scene, and same with this one right here. So that's just Y, and that's just X. And you can also, if you have your selection tool selected, you can just drag this too. And you can see how the coordinates are changing as it's moving. So that's pretty cool too. So I'm just going to make a keyframe on the position. So I hit the stopwatch. Keyframes made at this position right here. I move this forward 2 seconds. I'm just going to drag it to be right here. So now this line has appeared, and that is the animation path. And each of these dots is a single frame. So as it goes across the animation path, each dot is a single frame. There's also this too, if you wanted to mess around with it. These are handles, just like they would be for like a path tool in the Bezier in Photoshop or Illustrator. So you can mess with the path like that if you want to. So I'm just going to give it like a nice kind of wave. If I hit spacebar, hit play, nothing, you can't see anything because null objects don't reveal when you play back. You have to they only show up when you scrub. So what I'm going to do, so that you can see this, I'm just going to make sure no layer selected and go to the rectangle tool and just change it to the ellipse tool. It does that same thing it would in Illustrator. So I'm just going to put a circle right near that anchor point of the null object. I'm going to turn off the stroke, and I'm going to make it a red circle. Now, of course, nothing's going to happen until I parent the circle to the null object. So all I have to do is just, because I have this parent and leak column activated, I can just take the Pic Whip and parent it to that null object. And you can see how that changed to the layer that it's parented to. So now when I hit play, awesome. Okay, so it's pretty boring because what happens is it starts immediately and then it stops immediately. It's very rigid. It's not very, it's just not very pleasing as an animation. And as a motion designer, that's one of your big traits is how do you make this animation just kind of more organic and flowing and more pleasing to the eye. And that's where the graph editor comes in. So if I hit the graph editor, this button, it goes to this. You don't see anything because you have to have a parameter selected, an animated parameter selected to see how the keyframes behave. So here we go. This is how it works. So you're seeing what this is. This is a graph of values. So it starts at this value. The green is the Y. You can see as I hover over that, this is the Y position. This is the X position. So because I messed with the animation path, the Y position mimics that same type of path. So as I go along, so it basically just starts at this value. These are the two dots right here, and it travels across time to these next two values. And that's all keyframing is just setting different values and then how they interact over time in between those two values. So there's one way to look at this graph editor. These are just the values that this object is traveling to and from. But if you right click in this graph right here, you have this selected, edit value graph. That's what this is. This is the value graph. These are values and they're graphed over time. There's this one that's a lot more fun called the speed graph. And it doesn't look like the value graph because this is just measuring velocity. So basically it starts immediately at that velocity and then stops immediately at that velocity and goes to 0. You can see right here, here's 0 pixels per second. So it stops immediately. And what you want a nice ease from 0 up to the full velocity and then back down to 0. That's how you start making really nice animations. So all you have to do is select these 2 points I'm just going to select this last one right here. I'm going to drag it down. So it kind of does this exponential type move where it starts like that and then it gradually over time goes down to 0. Now watch what happens when I hit play. It is a nice little slowdown. But it could be nicer, and that's the cool part. So I'm going to actually just move this keyframe a little bit longer down the timeline. I'm going to pull this handle like that. So now you can see it shoots up to be really fast and then slows down in this exponential way. Now watch what happens. Very cool. So what's happening is it travels really fast. This is the peak of its velocity, and then over time it just kind of exponentially goes down to 0 pixels per second and stops. It's very nice. It's a very nice animation. And so I can do the same thing for the beginning too. I'll drag this one down to 0 and I'll pull this handle out. So now it'll start at 0, shoot up really fast, and then shoot down back down to 0. Just like that. And that's animation. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to kind of even out this, because you could actually do this. I could, if I stretch this out, it takes a long time to start, and then shoots and then stops. This is all just based on your preference too. So I'm going to do a thing just for fun. I'm going to keyframe the scale of that circle too. So the position of the null is driving the circle, and just as the same as the scale would too. As I scale the null object, it scales the circle as well, because the circle is parented to the null object. So I'm going to, at the beginning of this animation, I'm going to hit keyframe right here. I'm going to scale it down to 20%. And you can see how a keyframe's already been set right here. And then I'm going to go forward like to the midpoint, scale this up to 200%. Now it's automatically making keyframes now because I've hit the stopwatch and now I'm animating. And at the end of this, I'm going to go back down to 50%. So you can see it's not that bad just because the position animation is so nice, but I want the scale to also kind of ease along its animation as well. So I'm just going to drag these like this. Now that's the reason why it's going negative in past 0 is because it increases in scale and then decreases in scale and then stops. So that's why it's doing that. And that's not bad. I'm going to expand this handle a little bit. Expand this one. Awesome. Okay, so that's animation. It's really like just a lot of messing around in the graph editor to really finesse your animations. So we're going to do the same thing with the trim path animations for this text. Now what I'm going to do, this is not bad as far as visually seeing what's different, because the nice part is the shape layers are blue and then the Illustrator layers are just a lighter blue, and you can set that color right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the Illustrator layers, by holding down Control while I click. And I'm gonna I just like it to be more stark. I just like them to be more contrasty. So I'm gonna select green as the layer color, and then I'm gonna go through and select these shape layers, and I'm just gonna make them a really annoying orange, which isn't too bad. Actually, I need it to be more annoying, just so it's easier to see the different layers. I'm gonna make it purple. Cool. Now it's obvious. These are the shape layers. These are illustrative layers. Just because I like to do it that way. So what I'm gonna do is just select. So then you don't get lost in, I don't know, it can get really daunting, the amount of layers that show up on a timeline. So I like to keep them separate like that so you don't get lost. I'm gonna select all the shape layers, and I'm gonna hit U. So it's revealed all of the animations. So this is basically the whole train from H all the way to the end. Now what we're gonna do is finesse each of these animations to look nicer. So I'm gonna start with this one. I'm gonna select end on the H reveal layer, go to the graph editor, and I'm gonna make sure that this is the value graph that's set right now. So it's just set from 0 to 100%, and then with no easing. So I'm going to go to the speed graph, and you can see that it has the same look as it did on the other composition. So I'm just going to take the end of it and drag it down. Okay, that's good for that one. You can see how the keyframe icon has changed, because now it's gone from a linear or very rigid animation to now it's an ease. That's what that means. So go to this one, do the same thing here, just bring these down. Okay, the write-on is complete. That part's bugging me. Hold on. It's because it's got that hard edge right here. I'm just gonna soften it out like that, and then also bring it up. There we go. There we go. I think just for fun too, I want to have the line right here. I want this last line to be really long, to take a long time. almost as long as it takes to get the rest of the whole thing to do. There we go. That's kind of cool. Even longer, maybe. And then have this one start a little bit earlier. There we go. That's pretty cool. I'm going to go and finesse this a little bit. I'm just going to make this a little bit longer. Perfect. I like that. Okay, next thing I want to do is I'm just going to have these words kind of reveal themselves from behind this line right here. And it'll make sense in a second. Because what I want to do with this is I want it to scale down kind of like that. But it'll be hidden from right here. It'll reveal as it crosses over this black line. So as it comes back to right here, you'll see it like that. And what's annoying right now, what I don't like, is this is scaling down based on this right here. This is the anchor point of this layer. See how it's scaling down right to there? I want the anchor point of this layer to be right in the middle of the logo. So it comes from the center, not from right here. And the easiest thing to do is there's a button right here. It's this button, the pan behind tool or the anchor point tool. Shortcut is Y. If you select that, you can see this new icon. I can just grab the anchor point right here of this layer and I can put it wherever I want. So I'm just going to put it pretty much right in the middle of the logo, right there. Now when I go back to scale this, it'll do that. It'll scale from the center, which is what I want, just like that. Same with this thing, the text up here. So I'm gonna do the same thing. You can see how the anchor point's right there. Go to the pen behind tool, the anchor point tool, and I'm just gonna take it and put it pretty much in the same spot. And now when I scale that right here, it does the same thing. But it won't be revealed. Right now it'll be hidden until it passes this black line, and then you'll see it come out like that. So it'll be hidden, revealed, hidden, revealed. And I'll show you how to do that also with track mats, which is really helpful. So the first thing to do is I'm going to make sure no layer is selected and go to the Ellipse Tool and make a shape layer that is a circle. Same thing, Shift and Control to do from the center. And it's not going to need to be exact. It needs to just kind of be in the middle of the black lines. Like kind of like that. And I'm going to scale it vertically with this so it's not exactly a perfect circle, but it covers up to this black line right here. Okay, perfect. I'm going to call this text reveal. And I'm going to put it right above the Richmond, Virginia text. Now, when I make this a alpha mat, look what happens. The circle disappears, and also the text disappears. This is because the circle, as you can see this blue outline right here, this is the circle. So the circle is filled in right here. But because the text is right here, it's disappeared because it only will reveal inside where the circle is. So if I scale this down, watch what happens. it gets revealed. See, this is the opposite of what I want to happen. I want it to be disappeared right here and then reveal right here. But I like how it goes. It looks like it comes out of that line, right? That's what I want. So what you do instead, I want the inverse alpha of this circle of the track matte. So you just go back to the track matte layer, and instead of alpha matte, you do alpha inverted matte. So now it shows up again, and now when I scale this down, it disappears. Because right now it's set to the inverse of where the circle is. So wherever the circle's not, basically, is where the text will be revealed. That's what I want, just like that. Just to come out like that. Perfect. So I'm going to hit keyframe. That's going to be the end of the animation at 100%. And I'm just going to scale it down just enough to disappear, which ends up being around 80%. And that's the animation that I want. And I'm just going to go into the graph editor again and ease this animation so it looks nice. Perfect. Look at that. I like that. That's very nice. And then I'll do the same thing for the barbershop, and I'll just actually duplicate this layer of the text reveal. So you can just do Command D or Control D, duplicate, and I'm just going to drag it above. And I'll do the same thing here. Alpha inverted matte. It won't disappear because right now the circle is inside this part. So this is outside of it, so it's being revealed. So now when I scale this down, again, it does it. Exactly what I want. So I'll set a keyframe for that. I'll come down a little bit, go into the graph editor, ease that. Now, just for fun, just because I like doing this stuff, I want to do a little bit of rotation too. So what I did there's shortcuts for every parameter in this transform. So anchor point is A, position is P, scale is S, rotation is R, and opacity is not O, it's T, opacity. So when I select a layer and I hit T, it just shows opacity, A, anchor point, P, position, scale, rotation. And what I can also do is I hold down Shift, I can add another parameter. So I have rotation already selected. I can hold down Shift and then hit S, scale gets added, Shift and then P, position gets added. So that's how you can quickly, with shortcuts, just show the parameter that you want to mess around with. So I want to do a little bit of rotation, just for fun. Just a little bit of variation. So I'm going to rotate it like that. Now, because the anchor point is set in the middle, it's going to go along the circle, which is really nice. So when it comes in, it does a nice little, just a little bit of a rotation, which is just going to add just a little bit of sugar to it. So I'm going to select the rotation, go to the graph editor again, and then just going to ease that rotation too. That's nice. Might be a little bit too much rotation, actually. So I'm just gonna, let's see. Yeah, that's good. Now, because I went that direction, I'm gonna go the other direction for the top one, for Richmond. So I'm going to add rotation again. And when this comes up, I'm just going to do it this way. Ease that in. It's annoying right now, but hold on. Awesome. And I'm just going to move the barbershop keyframes to be closer to the Richmond, Virginia keyframes, so they kind of reveal at the same time. There we go. That's pretty cool. It's a little bit. No, that's nice. Okay, that's good. Okay, I mean, we're basically ready to just put the finishing touches on this. So if I select all the layers, Command A, and I hit this arrow to collapse, it'll collapse all the layers so I can see all the layers, and it's not just a mess of keyframes. Now if I hit tilde, I can full screen it, and then I'll deselect all the layers and hit U, and so here are all the animated parameters of every layer. So you can see how they're all laid out. Okay, so that's too much right now. What I'm going to do, I kind of want to bring these in. Let's see. That's not bad. That's okay. Now, remember that I parented the initial Illustrator layers to that parent null object. Now, if I move the parent null object around, look what happens. A mess, a complete mess. And this is because I haven't parented the shape layers to the parent null object either. So when I'm moving the parent null object, I'm moving the Illustrator layers, but not the track matte reveal layers. And so it just becomes this weird thing. That's not cool. So all you gotta do is just select all the layers, and then hit Control or Command to deselect the parent layer, and then Pic Whip the parent layer again. And now they've all been parented to this layer. So now I can move it around, and everything moves with it. It's very cool. Because I also want to do a thing where I scale this down. Like this is the initial reveal. Is like it's going to scale up like this as it's writing on, and at the very end, the location, text, and this will reveal. So I'm going to set a keyframe for this to be the final scale setting. And I'm just going to scale this down like that. Go to the graph editor and make this really fast. Now it's just poorly timed right now, but that's the general idea. And also it's still not fast enough, really. It needs to be sped up. Let me see. So we can just do it by hand, really. Okay, so there's a really cool setting, a really cool shortcut in After Effects, where if you have multiple, like say I made 2 more keyframes for the barbershop text, right? So I had 3 keyframes like this, but I wanted to speed them up. I wanted to make them faster and move them closer together, but I wanted them to move all proportionally as I moved this one, right? So all I have to do is highlight all these keyframes, and if I hold down Alt while I'm dragging, look what happens. It all scales proportionally without having to go back by hand and do all that. It saves so much time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing. Just delete those keyframes. I'm going to do the same thing across all of these right here. So I select all of them like that. If I hold down Alt, I can scale them all down proportionally to be faster. That saves, I mean, I don't know, a solid 5 minutes of just dinking around with keyframes. So that's way better now. Obviously, this is too, it takes too long to scale up, so I'm going to move the scale keyframes to be earlier. Let's see. You know what? I don't like that scaling up thing, actually. To go with the whole ride-on effect, we need to ride on these circles too. These circle lines. So I'm going to delete the scale keyframe from the parent. That's already pretty nice, just as a nice little reveal. But the only thing we have to do now is just do the same ride-on effect for these lines. So just real quick, I'm going to do that. That's pretty good. Good luck.